Hi there, I'm Savannah Mexto with Mannor Law Group, welcoming you to another webinar Wednesday with esteemed estate planning and elder law attorney, Bob Manor. If you're a real estate investor, this current housing market could make or break your success. But what many real estate investors don't know is that their estate plan can too, or in some cases, their lack of estate plan. On this week's webinar Wednesday, attorney Bob Manor will discuss the important legal planning concerns every real estate investor should know. But before I pass the mic to Bob, I'd like to cover a few housekeeping details. First, even though Bob is an attorney, today's webinar will not give specific legal advice. If you have a question about your unique situation, please contact us after the webinar. Also, if you have a general question during today's presentation, please use the question box. We will save time to review questions during the webinar. If for some reason we don't get to your question, we will contact you after the presentation. Also note that today's presentation will be recorded and the replay will be sent to you tomorrow so that you can share it with your family, your friends, or anyone else who you think could benefit from hearing this information. Now, why should you listen to what the folks at Mannor Law Group have to say? First, note that we're a nationally recognized and respected elder law and estate planning firm. All three of our attorneys are accredited by the Veterans Administration to assist veterans with claims and appeals. Our managing attorney, Bob Manor, is nationally board certified as an elder law attorney by the National Elder Law Foundation. He is one of only 19 attorneys in Michigan to achieve this designation. Bob is also a leader among elder law attorneys in Michigan. He is currently chair-elect of the State Bar of Michigan Elder Law and Disability Rights Section and past president of the National Academy of Elder Law Attorneys, Michigan chapter. And of course, Mannor Law Group has been honored by readers of our local paper as the best or favorite law firm for the last 8 years in a row. And with that, I'd like to welcome attorney Bob Manor.
Hi, folks. We're going to get right into it. And I think there's really two things that we want to be kind of focused on when we're talking about real estate investors. One is going to be the liability issues. And so what do I mean by liability issues? Well, you know, if you're investing in real estate, whether it's commercial or residential real estate, you're more exposed than the average person because there's more possibility of lawsuits and things going wrong. If it's residential real estate, you know, even things like lead-based paint or you know, slip and fall, all of the different things that could create some exposure for you. So we really want to think about it from a standpoint of liability. And then the second part is management and success. And what do I mean by management and succession? Management and succession is we want to make sure that things are set up for what happens tomorrow. You know, what's going to be the next thing. And so a lot of times when we have investors, particularly folks that have just 1 or 2 rental properties, or they have maybe even just 5 or 6 rental properties or things like that. In other words, they're not necessarily a huge investor, but they have several, you know, rentals that are going to require management and require taking care of things. And so one of the things that we want to think about is, well, what happens next? What if you got sick? What if you died? You know, how do we make sure that there's going to be a smooth transition? I'll tell you, because we work with a lot of older folks, I will tell you that many times when dad or mom had several rental properties, when dad or mom get older, the kids are just kind of at a loss as to what to do about the rental properties because it really wasn't their thing. It was mom or dad's thing. And mom and dad manage them. And sometimes we have long-time, you know, renters or things like that, but there's not a succession plan in place, and there's not an easy conversion of management of those properties. So we want to make sure that both from a standpoint of liability and just day-to-day management, that we've got a plan. We've got a plan in place in case you get sick, in case you get old. Hopefully we get old. And in case you die, of course. And obviously there's going to be some tax and other things that we're going to be looking at too. So those are the primary two things that I think that we need to focus on when it comes to estate planning for real estate investors. Okay, so I've got a series of these pictures or little diagrams that I think will be helpful in kind of expressing my examples here. So in this example, we've got real estate investor spouse 1 and real estate investor spouse 2. And they've got 5 rental properties. So the idea of the rental property is I'm representing the green as money in and out, and the red is liability or risk. Okay. And so this is the way a lot of folks would do it, is that they have they own it. Spouse 1 and spouse 2 own the 5 rental properties. So on the deed to the properties, it'll say, so we're going to call them Sally and Charlie. Okay, so Sally and Charlie, so Sally and Charlie own these 5 rental properties. And if you look at the deeds to each of those properties, it would say this property is owned by Sally and Charlie. All right. So here's where the issue comes in. What if on rental property number 1 that there's some big lawsuit, that there's a slip and fall? Well, hopefully we have insurance for it, right? I mean, obviously that's going to be the first line of defense. But a lot of times we want to have more than one line of defense. And so if, and I'm going to get my drawing tools here, whoops. So if there's an issue on this one and there's some kind of lawsuit, well, what is exposed to that lawsuit? Well, okay, so obviously the property is exposed to the lawsuit. So there's a slip and fall on the property, or there's some kind of massive damages claim or whatever it is, or the insurance, there's some problem, whatever it is. What is exposed? What liability is there? Obviously, it would be the value of this property. But what else is exposed? This property and this property and this property and this property, and your bank accounts and your bank accounts and your house and your vacation property and your, in other words, everything is exposed because of a problem with one of the properties. Now it's not just limited to that property, it's everything. So what if it's not related to the property that you get sued, or you get sued because of a car accident? All right, so you get in a car accident. I'm not going to come up with hypotheticals, terrible hypotheticals of why you might get sued, but for whatever reason you get sued for, personally. So Charlie gets sued, and what happens now? So now what's exposed? Well, this property is exposed, and 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 your bank account's exposed, and your house is exposed, and your investments are exposed, and everything. In other words, whether it's you getting sued personally, either spouse, or if it's a suit related to one of the properties, there's going to be exposure there. And I'm not just talking about lawsuits, any kind of debt that might be involved, okay? That is the issue here. That's the liability issue. So, having said that, let's see what happens. Yeah, there we go. Okay, so good. So now, what's the first line of defense? What's the first thing that people think of when they say, okay, well, I don't like that. I don't like all that exposure. So they form an LLC, limited liability company. So I'm representing the limited liability company as this big bubble, right? So the bubble, the circle around it, that's the limited liability company. So now what happens? So we have one LLC and we put 5 properties in it. That's the way a lot of investors will do this. They'll set up the Sally and Charlie Real Estate Company, and the Sally and Charlie Real Estate Company LLC will own these 5 properties. Well, that may or may not be the best answer. So let's get into this. So what happens there? So now there's this big lawsuit, or this big problem, or this big debt associated with this property. And what's exposed? Well, the value of this property is exposed, and 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 the value of this property is exposed. But what's not exposed is you guys, right? Because you're protected because everything's in the bubble. In other words, the lawsuit can't get out of the bubble, the LLC bubble. So now the problem is all 5 properties exposed, but at least your house isn't exposed. Your bank account's not exposed. Your private investments are not exposed. Your 401k is not exposed. It's just limited to what's in the bubble. So I think the next obvious thing would be, well, shouldn't we just then have more bubbles? And that's the next, option here. So now we say, okay, great. Well, what if we just had 5 bubbles instead, 5 LLCs? So we have the Sally and Charlie Limited Liability Company number 1, the Sally and Charlie Limited Liability Company number 2, Sally, and so on. You got it. And the idea then is there's this big debt associated with this, a lawsuit or whatever else the debt is. Where can the debt go? Well, it can't get out of this bubble. That means that this house is not exposed, this house is not exposed, none of the other houses are exposed because the debt doesn't leave the bubble if the lawsuit or the debt is associated just with that one property. What else is not exposed? Your bank account, your investment account, your house, your 401k, all the rest of the stuff. All right, so this is a good option. Why don't everybody do this? So why is it that a lot of real estate investors will actually go back to this and have multiple properties in an LLC? And the answer is logistics, paperwork. And so sometimes that your CPA or your accountant will be like, well, we got to file separate, taxes for each of those LLCs. And if we don't want to have separate, tax returns for each of those LLCs, then maybe we'll just have fewer LLCs. So I've had that a number of times where I'm recommending, we got 5 rental properties, and I say, well, we should have 5 LLCs. And then they talk to their accountant, and the accountant says, okay, well, this is what, the logistics of that are from a standpoint of reporting it to the IRS and tax forms and things like that. And then they will choose to have less LLCs, maybe 1, maybe 3, maybe 2, whatever it is. But from a legal standpoint, from the lawyer's standpoint, it's always going to be that we'd prefer you're going to be better protected if you have an LLC for each entity, for each property, so that the lawsuit, the debt can't get out of that bubble and get to these other properties or your personal property. All right, so let's think about this though. What about if you get sued? So now Charlie gets sued because medical malpractice, so, he's a doctor, or Charlie gets sued because of a car accident. There's a school bus or something, whatever it is. Charlie gets sued. Now what is exposed? Everything, right? So Charlie gets sued, and now Charlie's money is exposed, the house is exposed, the investments are exposed, and all 5 LLCs are exposed. Why? Because, well, you can't get out of the bubble with the debt. You own the bubble, right? So you own each of these 5 bubbles. You own each of those 5 LLCs. So if you personally get sued, then you own those, and therefore they're all exposed. All right. So is there another level? Can we step this up and say, boy, I want to be better protected than that? And so let's see. Yeah. Okay. So the answer is there are options for protecting you if you personally got sued. Let's see if I can erase all of my scribbles here. Okay. So what if, what's the possibility here? Well, one possibility is we could do an asset protection trust. What is an asset protection trust? Well, it's different than a regular trust, and we're going to get into regular trusts in a minute here. But what some people would do is, if they want to be as protected as they can, is we would have the 5 bubbles, meaning a separate LLC for each property, and then we put the 5 bubbles in an asset protection trust. Now, an asset protection trust is usually going to be an irrevocable trust. Okay. And the idea of an irrevocable trust is, in order to get the protections, you got to give up something. And so sometimes they're a good idea and sometimes they're not a good idea. because it depends on what you're willing to give up in exchange for the better protection. But the advantage of having an irrevocable trust, not a revocable trust, not a regular trust, but an asset protection trust, sometimes we'll call it an AP for asset protection trust, is that if you get sued, they can't necessarily get into the bubble. Okay, they can't access these things. So what else would be in your irrevocable trust? Well, maybe even your house, your personal residence, okay? Maybe some of your money. And then again, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on these asset protection irrevocable trusts. I have other webinars that discuss those, and you can look at those. But this is an option for folks that say, well, boy, if I get sued, I don't want all of my LLCs to be exposed. And that's a possible answer. So the next one is, well, what if you get sick? So I you know, not to try to be funny here, but I have the little stick figure here, and what if you get sick or what if you die? And this is one of the things I really think we need to think about from a real estate investor standpoint, because so many times I've worked with families that the parent was a real estate investor, and it's just a huge mess for the kids when dad gets older, when mom gets sick, when the parents die, and we don't have a significant succession plan in place. And so at a minimum, if we don't do an irrevocable trust or an asset protection trust, I think it's really, really a good idea to do a revocable trust. What do I mean by revocable trust? That means it's changeable. That means it's your trust. That means it stays under your social security number. It means that we're not giving up any control. It means we're not giving up anything, that you're simply having the revocable trust, which is almost like a will substitute, like a last will and testament substitute, but the trust is going to do a couple of things for you that not having a trust is going to make it more difficult. And that is provide for management, proper management. So the two of you, Sally and Charlie, are in charge, everything's fine, and something happens to one or both of you. How do we make sure that we still have control and access, and we can still collect rents, and we can still buy and sell properties and things like that? Well, with a revocable trust, you name a backup. You name a successor trustee, someone to be in charge if you can't. And if all of the bubbles are in the trust, and if all of the assets are in the trust, then we're able to have that liability protection, and we're able to be able to have succession planning. We're able to have a plan in place so that even if you're still alive, that someone can step up and manage this for you if you get sick, if you decide to go on a 6-month vacation, if you if you die, if you get dementia, if you just get old, so at some point as we get older, sometimes we ask for our family to help with the management of our finances. And so often when we had where dad had several rental properties, the kids are just kind of pulling their hair out because they don't know how to manage the rental properties. Well, if we have the control options in place, if we have the revocable trust, we have the LLCs titled to the revocable trust, it's going to provide for proper, adequate succession planning and management to say, okay, well, in the event that dad's not able to manage it anymore, we have a daughter that's going to be able to step up and take care of things. In the event that dad dies, we don't have to go through probate on the LLCs. We don't have to go through probate on the houses. We will have the trust that will continue to manage it, and daughter will be able to step up and take control and collect rents and do all those types of things. So when we have rental properties, I strongly recommend that we do those two extra things that we don't always do in every other case. But one would be that we have LLCs for the properties, and number two is that we have a trust that then owns the LLCs. So instead of you owning the LLC, the trust owns the LLC, and you own the trust. So because you're still down here happy and smiling because you still own it, you still have complete control over it. But now there's some succession planning in there. There's some planning for if you get sick or and any kind of management issues that we're going to have, and we have that liability protection. So that's the ins and then the outs of it. Those are the primary things that I think we need to be talking about when you have real estate as an investment, and how that might be a little bit different for estate planning. And you may have some questions. So if you have questions, you're welcome to type in the question, or Savannah's going to come on and give you some instructions about how to get a hold of us, and maybe we can help you with your planning, make sure everything's set up properly for both liability and succession planning. So Savannah is going to step in and kind of give you those instructions.
Thanks, Bob. And thanks everyone else for joining us today. As Bob mentioned, we have a couple of easy ways for you to contact our team. Maybe you have questions. Maybe you heard something that gives you some concern today that you'd like to talk about with our team. So there's two ways you can do that. You can give us a call. Our phone number, our 1-800 number is 1-800-990-6030. That's 1-800-990-6030. Also in the chat, I've put a link to a calendar. When you click that link, you can select a day and time when a member of our team can give you a call. So maybe now's not a great time to pick up the phone, but you'd like to schedule a time so that you can connect with our team. Go ahead and click that link. There's no risk, no obligation. It's just a call to ask us some questions, and we can ask questions about your situation and get to know you a little bit, and you can get to know us too. So again, click that link or give us a call, 1-800-990-6030. I'm also sending you an email that you should get in probably about 15-20 minutes. It'll have the same information. And then remember, tomorrow I'll also send you an email with the replay of today's presentation. Thank you again for joining. We're always happy that you can be here, and we will see you next week.